Well, welcome back. This will be a lesson on the types of luminescence made possible through chemistry and quantum mechanical processes. First off, some terminology. A lot of these processes may or may not involve an initial absorption event, which is just simply a photon of light being absorbed by the electron within a molecule, raising that electron to a higher energy state. And typically this initial process can be on the order of femtoseconds, a very fast time scale relative to the future processes we'll begin talking about. All these processes, though, to be part of luminescence, do involve an emission event, which is just simply some excited electron in the process of lowering its energy from one state to another, results in the release of the excess energy as a photon of light. Luminescence, we'll look at two different types: photoexcitation, which is the types of processes that involve an initial absorption event, two of which include fluorescence and phosphorescence. And then the next will be chemiluminescence, which is simply through the mixing of chemicals in some way, there is excess energy that excites an electron and then results in the emission of a photon of light without any initial absorption events or absorption of light to start the process. For photoexcitation, we can look at non-radiative events and radiative events. The radiative are the ones that result in the emission of a photon. What we have here is essentially looking at different electronic states: the ground state S0, and then the later excited states S sub 1, S sub 2. When a photon of light is absorbed by an electron, this can cause a ground state electron or an electron in a certain state to gain energy and raise into a higher excited state. And then the following processes are possible. It is possible for an electron to undergo what's called internal conversion, or before we get into that, each of these excited states and ground electronic state, they have various vibrational states. That will be essentially the gradient of vibrational states between different electronic states. Now, if an excited electron undergoes internal conversion, that's simply an electron in an excited state entering the vibrational state of a lower electronic state, but that vibrational state is at the same energy level as the higher excited state. For example, electron risen to the second excited state might enter internal conversion and enter a high vibrational state for the first excited state. Now, when in this gradient of vibrational states, it's possible to enter vibrational relaxation, a process of dissipating excess energy as heat without emitting a photon of light, which eventually drops down to, which may result in dropping down to an electronic state, the ground vibrational state of an excited state. Or perhaps it will just, or if vibrational states are overlapping enough, this could result in the excited electron dropping back down to the ground electronic state. The key here is that internal conversion and vibrational relaxation are events an electron can go through that do not involve the release of a photon of light, so they will not be luminescent. They just involve the release of heat energy, and these events can easily be on the order of picoseconds to hundreds and thousands of femtoseconds. But a much slower process is the radiative event, or phosphorescence. In any way, shape, or form, once an excited electron reaches the first excited state, if there isn't a gradient of vibrational states to seamlessly drop down to the ground state, an excited electron can instead drop down into the ground state from the first excited state directly by releasing or emitting a photon of light in the process. Now, because of internal conversion and vibrational relaxation, the emitted photon through phosphorescence will be of lower energy or higher wavelength than the initial absorbed photon, which is why for certain chemical analyses it's possible to shine UV high energy light onto a molecule, causing it to phosphoresce in the visible light spectrum. And the actual phosphorescence events that can take on the order of nano to microseconds, so a order of time significantly larger than the initial absorption or vibrational relaxation non-radiative events. But unique to fluorescence is that this event is spin neutral. If the electron gets excited while it's in the upspin, it will drop back down and re-emit light during phosphorescence while still being in the upspin. If a downspin electron was excited, then if it undergoes fluorescence, it will still remain in the down state. Another type of photoexcitation event is phosphorescence. This involves the typical non-radiative events that we talked before, but there's also an additional event called intersystem crossing, which is not spin neutral. It results in a spin flip. Essentially, an electron in a singlet state enters a more energetically favorable triplet state, which results in a flip of its spin, either from up to down, down to up. This spin flip event can take from picoseconds to microseconds. And like with before, that electron might simply drop down to the ground state through non-radiative processes, through internal conversion, vibrational relaxation, which means it gets back to the ground state by just releasing the excess energy through heat, but not through releasing or emitting light. But if it reaches a state, an electronic excited state, where there isn't where it's more favorable to drop down quickly, to drop down to the ground state, it's possible through phosphorescence. But this phosphorescent event takes more time, on the order of milliseconds to hundreds of seconds, where all the other processes were fractions upon fractions of seconds. But if an electron does undergo phosphorescence, that's the point where an electron goes from that triplet excited state back to singlet ground state, but by releasing light during the process of dropping to a lower energy state. Now, chemiluminescence is essentially the release of photons of light, or the release of light without initially absorbing light at the start. One example could be triboluminescence, which is just a property of matter that results from mechanical stimulation, such as rubbing, grinding, stretching, compressing different materials. This can be seen through the chewing of lifesaver candy, or certain tapes when peeled apart from each other can result in the emission of light as well. Bioluminescence, which is seen in living organisms, such as with fireflies. They have a reaction between through the molecule luciferin, the enzyme luciferase, oxygen, and adenosine triphosphate, which results in the glowing effect. Or anglerfish, at the end of their lure, they have a bunch of bioluminescent bacteria, or photobacteria, that in the process of absorbing nutrients release light in that manner. And then chemiluminescence in the more typical sense, just the simple mixing of chemicals, is essentially what happens in glow sticks, where effectively hydrogen peroxide is mixed with some diphenyl oxalate compound that results in a high energy molecule that releases its high energy to excite the electrons in a certain pigment or glowing dye, resulting in that dye to release or emits light to luminesce. And depending on the dye, we can get various colors of glow sticks, from the typical orange, green, blue, red, yellow, purple as well. And that covers essentially the various types of luminescence made possible through quantum mechanical means and chemistry.